This is the femme fatale, an irresistibly seductive, impossibly mysterious, excessively striking woman with a penchant for living life on the edge. You might recognise her from 1940s and 50s film noir and from post-World War II noir fiction, but make no mistake, variants of the femme fatale have been around for centuries. Dangerous women leading men astray have been a staple in storytelling, probably since the origin of stories. And, of course, we see femme fatale-esque figures in our media today. She's a fascinating character type. Alluring, wry, witty, intelligent, beautiful. But be wary. She's also cunning, self-serving, manipulative, and dangerous. The English translation of femme fatale is, after all, lethal, fatal, or deadly woman. Picture the grizzled detective, working hard to get to the bottom of his case and throwing back highballs into the early hours. And by his side, you'll find the femme fatale, purring sweet nothings in his ear. But she's the kind of woman he should absolutely keep at arm's length if he wants to survive, because under that tantalising facade, she is ruthless. She'll expose his greatest weaknesses, and she poses the ultimate threat to his masculinity. But is this the whole story? Is there more going on behind the sultry, self-serving facade of the femme fatale? A lot of femme fatale characters conform to these stereotypes, but not all of them. What happens to the femme fatale in the hands of a writer who sees her as more than a seductive obstacle for the protagonist to encounter, rather than an overtly sexualized evil vixen there to be shamed and vilified by unchallenged patriarchal hierarchies? Has there ever been a classic noir novel that upturns and challenges these sexist stereotypes? Is there such a thing as a feminist femme fatale? To answer these burning questions, I'm going to be taking a very close look at an absolutely incredible, devastating, difficult and brilliant novel, In a Lonely Place by Dorothy B. Hughes, published in 1947 during the peak of noir fiction. I'm going to examine how, in the most bold and unwavering fashion, Hughes takes the sexist stereotypes so prevalent in noir and masterfully subverts them into a novel so thoughtfully and astutely critical of the genre, I just can't stand it. And it's not just the femme fatale character that Hughes turns upside down. In a series of blinding moves, she upturns everything that you thought you knew about noir character types. The grizzled, cynical detective, the dastardly killer, the one-dimensional Madonna whore compliant women, and illuminates for her readers just how limiting, oppressive, and dangerous these stereotypes really are. But before we take to the lamplit city sidewalks and uncover the mystery at the heart of Hughes's dazzler of a novel, welcome. I'm Dr. Rosie Whitcombe, this is Mousy the fuzziest copper in all the fuzz, and we make videos on all the best page turners, so please subscribe if that's your jam. A very big thank you, as always, to our patrons over on Patreon and channel members right here on YouTube. We appreciate your support to no end, and if you'd like to join them, click the link in the description. A content warning for misogyny, domestic abuse, violence against women, rape, manipulation, and murder is in effect for this video, so please keep that in mind as we proceed. And now, come take a stroll with me down the gritty, grey-scale streets of 1940s Los Angeles to enter the mind of Dorothy B. Hughes and her handsome, hard-boiled protagonist, Mr. Dix Steele. Well, hey there, you tall drink of water. I'm an elusive woman with a storied past, an unparalleled magnetism, and a penchant for getting you, yes you, into danger. I'm alluring, mysterious, and predominantly defined by my sexuality. I represent the dark and the deviant, and while I'm sure to give you the time of your life, I might also bring it to an untimely close. Pick up a copy of In a Lonely Place, and this is the kind of femme fatale figure you might expect to encounter. She is, after all, the classic noir stereotype, but nothing about this novel is stereotypical. Characters might seem that way to begin with, but there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. Take Dix Steele, for example. Now, I don't know about you, but I can hardly take that name seriously. You hear Dix Steele and you think of a guy who's all, "The name's Dix Steele. I spend my nights in the darkest bars with the finest dames, and I eat knuckleheads like you for breakfast." The phrase toxic masculinity wasn't around in 1947, but isn't it just the most toxically masculine name you've ever heard? And this is very deliberate on Hughes's part, I think. She's parodying the genre. And in doing so, she's forecasting something very important. This man, Dix Steele, the protagonist within whose head we must spend the next 222 pages, is performing an identity. He is not what he seems. I also want to point out here that, as you might have worked out, there is a film version of In a Lonely Place. That's where a lot of these great clips are coming from, but in this video I'm discussing the novel. Why is this important to point out? Well, the book and the film are very, very different. As Megan Abbott puts it, director Nicholas Ray can't resist putting a luminous, romantic sheen on Dix and Laurel's doomed romance, with his Dix serving as a tortured anti-hero. In Hughes's novel, however, there is not a drop of romanticism, not a touch of fantasy. It is a dark, cold gem of a book, a gem without a flicker of heat or light, one that cuts to the touch. So yes, we're using the clips, but only for illustrative purposes. We're analysing the novel, not the film. Now, to understand how In a Lonely Place, the novel, subverts noir and its associated stereotypes and archetypes, we need to get a feel for the noir genre, for its typicalities. Read noir fiction and you're entering a dark, urban world, full of cynical, alcoholic cops, ruthless killers, and dangerous femme fatales. Corruption is everywhere, and hope for a better world is a far-flung concept. The stories you'll encounter are gritty and intense and often male-centric. Women do feature, of course, as femme fatales, but also sometimes as the good girl, a character who's often pitted against the femme fatale. The good girl is the sensible, wifely character, the Madonna, you could say, to the femme fatale's whore. Women also show up in noir as the victims of heinous crimes. Young, silly women who go out alone and end up strangled on a verge. The next day their bodies examined by detectives in fedoras with toothpicks hanging out their mouths who say things like, "Damn, what a waste." These women are nothing more than bodies, really. They're props. Now, as you may have guessed, noir isn't the place to go for happy endings. Most characters seem to meet with unpleasant ends, the femme fatale very much included. In most cases, she'll either end up in prison or dead. Noir fiction deals in dead women. Oh, and it also deals in misogyny. It's often argued that the genre itself was born out of a specific form of misogyny, rooted in a pervasive sense of post-World War II emasculation and paranoia, as Abbott explains. The pervasive and ultimately convincing theory of 1940s noir links it to the return of soldiers to a changed America. Gone are the economic opportunity, the glory, the innocence of their own youth. And perhaps, most of all, their women. Out of the kitchen and into the workforce. Potentially into their jobs. And who knew what else they had been up to while he was gone? Whom they had let in their bedrooms? The result was a dark current of books and films depicting men alone facing a world over which they have no control, and in which the greatest threat is emasculation at the hands of the woman, the femme fatale. And this woman, this femme fatale, will reap the violent consequences of this emasculation. Now, if we give Dorothy B. Hughes' masterpiece In a Lonely Place a quick surface read, we might be left thinking, how is it different or subversive? Isn't it complicit in portraying all the stereotypes you've just listed? You've got the detective on the case of a man who strangles women, you've got the femme fatale, you've got her sensible female counterpart, you've got mystery, tension and suspense, but look closer. The reason this book is so brilliant is because each and every one of these stock tropes and characters is put under a microscope. And not only does Hughes provide us with a radical re-examination of these characters, but with the fundamentals of mystery itself. In a Lonely Place follows the story of Dix Steele, who has returned to LA after fighting in World War II. He reconnects with an old war buddy named Brub Nikolai, and he learns that Brub is now a detective working on the case of the Strangler, a man who is prowling the streets, raping and murdering unsuspecting women. Dix also learns that Brub is now married to the insightful and sensible Sylvia. Dix is subletting his LA apartment from his friend Mel Terrace, who's currently travelling in Brazil, and he soon meets one of Mel's neighbours, the gorgeous and alluring and seductive Laurel Gray. Dix strikes up a romantic relationship with Laurel, and we follow this relationship through its ups and downs. And we also follow Brub, hot on the heels of The Strangler, and this tension is played out right to the novel's epic conclusion. Oh, and one other thing you should know, and there is a spoiler warning in effect here, Dix Steele, the novel's protagonist, the man within whose head you spend this entire book, is himself the Strangler. Experiencing the world from the killer's point of view might seem like a well-worn trope nowadays, but Hughes was one of, if not the first writer to frame a novel in this way, and it is chilling. It's a truly brilliant move on Hughes's part. Rather than a shadowy figure on the fringes of the tale, defined by a series of gruesome crimes, we get an extremely close and in-depth look into the psyche of a misogynistic killer. And believe me when I tell you, spending time in this man's head is no picnic. We hear a lot of his troubles and his anguish, but does it make me sympathise with him? Even a little bit? No. Dix Steele is the most horrendous, egotistical, arrogant, aggressive, and despicable character I've ever had the displeasure of encountering in literature. And this is what makes the whole thing so brilliant, because we're forced to sit in the awful cesspit that is Dix's brain. If we're going to read this book, we're going to get to know him intimately. He's such a well-drawn character, and that means that the suspense and fear that we feel for the women in his life, namely Sylvia and Laurel, is second to none. Now, learning that Dix is the killer was not, for me, a revelatory moment of shock. I had an inkling right from the beginning, and that inkling was confirmed in the first few chapters. And this isn't me bragging, by the way, I think Hughes makes it obvious. But the way she does it, it's so unsettling, because the truth surfaces gently, in a way that almost feels par for the course, that feels normal, because that's what it is to Dix. It's really clever and really discomforting because we almost become complicit in it. Here's an example of the inner workings of Dix's mind. So, early on in the novel, we learn that a young woman named Mildred Atkinson has been found strangled to death. At this point, we're pretty sure that Dix is the killer, but we haven't had absolute confirmation. In the section I'm going to share with you now, Dix is reading all about his own case, his own crime in the morning paper, and a reminder here of the content warnings I gave at the start of the video. The morning paper had columns on the case. Having been scooped by the afternoon papers on the original story, this sheet, at least, was making up its loss by intensive research. It had pictures of the girl, Mildred, of her family, of the apartment house where she'd played bridge, of the lonely spot in Beverly Glen Canyon where her body was found. Her name was Mildred Atkinson, and she had led a very stupid life. Grade school, high school, Hollywood High, but she was no beauty queen, business college, and a job in an insurance office. She was 26 years old, and she was a good girl, her parents sobbed. She played bridge with girlfriends, and she once taught a Sunday school class. She didn't have any particular gentleman friend, she went out with several. Not often, you could bet. The only exciting thing that had ever happened to her was to be raped and murdered. Even then, she'd only been subbing for someone else. The sleuths had found that she and the man had had a cup of coffee about midnight in a near drive-in. She didn't want to talk, but he was a decent-looking young fellow waiting for a bus, and the mist grew cold on the lonely corner. When he knew she was ripe for the suggestion, he mentioned coffee at the drive-in up at the corner of Linden Drive. Without being at all explicit, the narrative framing of the opening of this chapter confirms for us that Dix is the killer. So we're initially led to believe that the information we're getting about Mildred is from the newspaper. The first paragraph is made up of facts about what is actually in the article. But then it devolves into Dix's horrendous internal monologue. If this wasn't suggestive enough, we then get information from the case interspersed with Dix's memories. So the newspaper states that Mildred and her killer went to a drive-in for coffee. Dix then reminisces over how he waited until she was ripe for the suggestion before inviting her to the drive-in for coffee. These almost seamless interjections make this section so much more awful and chilling than a straight-up statement of fact would have been. Hughes could have said something like, Dix remembered putting his hands around her throat, etc., etc., and that would tell us what we need to know. Instead, we get something far more sinister by way of its normalcy that brings to the fore the acuteness of Dix's misogyny, his superiority complex, and his psychopathic disregard for what he deems Mildred's stupid life. Think about that for a second. Think about what we learn about her life from this section of text. Mildred dated different people. She had friends. She went to college. She had a job. From what we can tell, she had a decent relationship with her parents. To Dix, all of this is stupid. To Dix, a woman fostering relationships and living what appears to be a wholesome, fulfilling life is stupid. He wants his women exciting, isolated, as lonely as he is, and he hates Mildred for not being those things. She was barely even worth the kill. He would have preferred to kill someone far more tantalising. Fortunately for Dix, he's about to meet a woman who checks all those boxes. But I'll get to her in a minute. So this is the point in the novel that it becomes clear to us that Dix is the killer, and we're only on page 43, but really, we can work it out from almost the very beginning. The novel opens with Dix staring out to sea, enjoying the view and the bits of fog and reminiscing about his war days. He's very attuned to his surroundings, sensitive, almost soulful. And then he saw the girl. Isn't it alarming how this could almost read like the beginning of one of those romances where the guy sees the girl from across the bar and immediately falls in love? The implicit conflation of romance and predation is chilling here. We might even be fooled into believing that Dix has honest intentions. Maybe he's a hopeless romantic. He's not, though, and on the very next page, which by the way is only page 5, we get confirmation of that. He didn't walk hard, as she did, nor did he walk fast. Yet she heard him coming behind her. He knew she heard him, for her heels struck an extra beat, as if she had half stumbled, and her steps went faster. He didn't walk faster. He continued to saunter, but he lengthened his stride, smiling slightly. She was afraid. He could have caught up to her with ease, but he didn't. It was too soon. Better to hold back until he had passed the humped midsection of the walk, then to close in. She'd give a little scream, perhaps only a gasp, when he came up beside her. And he would say softly, "Hello." Only hello. But she would be more afraid. Dix wants this woman to be afraid. He gets off on it. He's smug. He's grotesque in the way he saunters, lengthens his stride, smiles to himself. He's also a huge fantasist, imagining how their meeting will go, how she might scream or gasp, how, as he follows her, her fear must be growing. So yeah, to my mind, it's pretty obvious from the off that Dix is not a good guy. At best, he's a creep. At worst, he's a dangerous, delusional predator. Now, at this early juncture in the novel, this woman manages to get away from him. Mildred Atkinson, unfortunately, does not. But what about the other women in his life? Indeed, what about the femme fatale herself, Ms. Laurel Gray? What does fate have in store for her? Let's have a look at the way Hughes introduces us and Dix to Laurel. He was walking fast. That was why he didn't see the girl until he almost collided with her at the arched street entrance of the patio. It shocked him that he hadn't noticed her, that he hadn't been aware. He stepped back quickly. "I beg your pardon," he said. It wasn't a formality as he said it. Shock made each word apology for a grave error. So, right off the bat, what's important to notice here is that Dix, a man seemingly very aware of his surroundings, a man who is usually in the position of watching women, preying on them, stalking them, a man who does the surprising, isn't aware of his surroundings, doesn't see Laurel coming, and is caught very much off guard. She surprises him, and this act singles her out. She's not like other women. She is the femme fatale. The girl didn't move for a moment. She stood in his way and looked him over slowly, from crown to toe, the way a man looked over a woman, not the reverse. Her eyes were slant, her lashes curved long and golden dark. She had red gold hair, flaming hair, flung back from her amber face, falling to her shoulders. This is a woman who keeps you on your toes, a woman who needs taming, a beautiful woman whose hair is on fire, whose amber skin is on fire too. She's burning hot. Her mouth was too heavy with lipstick, a copper red mouth. So, of course, her mouth is on fire too. A sultry mouth painted to call attention to its promise. She was dressed severely, a rigid, tailored suit, but it accentuated the lift of her breasts, the curl of her hips. She wasn't beautiful. Her face was too narrow for beauty, but she was dynamite. He stood like a dolt, gawking at her. In another context, this would perfectly encapsulate men writing women. It smacks of her boobs boobed boobily. But in this context, what Hughes is doing is very deliberate. Hughes gives us the well-worn conceits of the femme fatale. Her fiery hair and skin and mouth and general demeanour, her severe clothing, her explosive sexual magnetism. But given what we know about Dix, about the way this novel has thus far critiqued the noir genre, it's clear that by describing Laurel in this way, Hughes has an ulterior motive. Her inclusion of these stereotypes will bolster her critique. After Dix bumps into Laurel and begs her pardon, she looks him up and down and gives him a small, insolent smile, as if he were a dolt, not Dick Steele. "Granted," she said, and she walked past him into the patio. Oh, this woman. She's not one for taming. She's feisty. She strips away his bravado, and he loves it. He massively gets off on it. After all, it had been years since he'd seen a girl who could set him jumping. The redhead was it. Dix meets Laurel really early on in the book, actually before we get that absolute confirmation that he is the strangler, and we watch their relationship unfurl. Now, knowing what we know about Dix, knowing what we know about the femme fatale, a woman who often winds up dead, we then spend the entire novel stressed out of our minds waiting for him to kill her. There are plenty of scenes in which he gets really angry at her. He has to mind his temper, they argue a lot, and one such argument occurs after Laurel sees Dix entering his apartment with another woman. That woman being none other than Sylvia Nicolai, wife of Brub the detective. Laurel, the fiery femme fatale, is furious that Dix is entertaining another woman. She makes it her mission to intervene, to come over and size up this broad, and so, against Dix's wishes, the two women meet. They were together, Sylvia and Laurel. Each had come for that reason, to look upon the other. They were eyeing each other in the faint, patronising manner of all women to women, no matter the stake, when he turned into the living room. Dix knows how women operate. They're here to size each other up. They're here in competition, as women always are, whether there's a man involved or not, and we should trust Dix. He knows women. He observes the two of them together as Laurel walks into the room. Before her, Sylvia was colourless, and yet before Sylvia, Laurel was too richly coloured. Between them was the gulf of a circumstance of birth and a pattern of living. There was nothing could diminish the gulf. It occurs to me that I've used the phrase Madonna whore a couple of times now to describe the relationship between Laurel and Sylvia, and some of you might not have heard that phrase before, so I should probably explain. And this first meeting between the two women is a great way of doing that. So essentially, it's all stereotypes, right? You've got the Madonna, Sylvia, the good girl, the married woman, the sensible one, the plain and colourless waif. And then you've got Laurel, the woman so red, copper and gold, she's basically a bonfire, too alluring, too seductive and too colourful. When Dix considers the gulf of a circumstance of birth and a pattern of living that exists between the two women, what he means is Sylvia is well-to-do and married, and Laurel is a money-hungry whore looking for a man to wrap around her little finger. There's nothing that could bring these women together. They're entirely different species, utterly at odds, tenuously bridged only by their association to a man, and that man, of course, is Dix Steele. But I'm sure you're waiting for me to explain how Hughes takes all of this nonsense and superbly subverts it. And your waiting is over. Here we go. It's so good, and she really keeps you hanging on to the very end of the novel to find out. A crucial interaction, one that leads up to what is arguably the novel's climax, occurs a few evenings later. So Dix and Laurel, par for the course, have been arguing. He's angry with her for not keeping her dates with him, for meeting other men, for leaving before he wakes up in the morning, stuff like that. Nevertheless, they agree to meet Sylvia and Brub at the club for some food and drinks. After dinner and coffee, Dix asks Laurel to dance. "You've forgotten your manners, Dix," she said, so sweetly, so ladylike. A guest dances first with his hostess. So Dix asks Sylvia, his hostess, to dance, and presumes that Laurel will dance with Brub. To Dix's mind, Laurel is obviously only refusing his offer of a dance to irk him. She wants to make him jealous by dancing with Brub. She wants to dagger Sylvia. She wants to play with fire. But when Dix looks over, Laurel isn't dancing. She was sitting with Brub at the table, their heads together, their words intent. He didn't understand. He knew that Brub had risen to dance with Laurel as Sylvia and Dix left the table, but they hadn't danced. They had remained together to talk. They were talking as if they had waited a long time for this moment. Over the next several pages, we see Dix attempting to puzzle all of this out. He's surprised that Laurel and Brub seem to know each other. He forces Laurel to tell him what they were talking about. They row. At one point, he ends up even proposing to her for some reason. It's all very intense and weird. But ultimately, Dix comes to the conclusion that jealous, fiery Laurel was quizzing Bub to find out where he, Dix, was the other night. But all of this, all Dix's suppositions, are part of the delusion he constructs for himself. Because, as we find out at the novel's end, Laurel wasn't badgering Brub for information. She wasn't trying to ascertain whether Dix was dating other women. She wasn't jealous of Sylvia, and she wasn't out meeting other men. She was afraid. She suspected Dix, and she was making an alliance with Sylvia and with Brub to take him down. Now, it's not that Dix is oblivious to the potential that his friends and his lover might be suspicious of him. He is himself, and on multiple occasions, suspicious of them being suspicious of him, but he more or less always manages to refigure his delusion to assuage his own suspicions. And the way he does this is through reasserting his self-aggrandizing God complex. For he, and I quote, was Dick Steele. There was power in him. He is top man wherever he wanted to go. Laurel and the rest of them were mere mortals. They can't possibly have one up on him. But, as we find out, all this egotistical bullshit is part of Dix's delusion. Part of the reason this novel is so well written is because the narrative voice consistently corroborates Dix's delusions while simultaneously revealing them as such. And one of the best examples of this is basically Dix's entire relationship with Sylvia. As he does with all women, Dix immediately sees Sylvia in a very specific way, and before she's even opened her mouth, he's certain that he's worked out everything there is to know about her. He saw her as he would always see her. A slender girl in a simple beige dress, curled in a large wing chair by the white fireplace. Her hair was the colour of palest gold, a silvery gold, and she wore it pulled away from her face into a curl at the back of her neck. I mean, first of all, compare the way Dick sees Sylvia with the way he sees Laurel. It's Madonna whore, right? Laurel is the red-haired, red-hot, smouldering temptress. Sylvia is slender, simple, and beige. Her hair isn't the red of passion and desire, but the pale, silvery gold of an aged angel. Her eyes, far from Laurel's unearthly amber, are beautiful, sea blue, and slanted like wings. Again, really leaning into these images of purity and freshness and goodness here. And then we get the kicker. Yet she wasn't beautiful. You wouldn't look at her in a room of pretty women, in a bar or night spot. You wouldn't notice her. She'd be too quiet. She was a lady, and she wouldn't want to be noticed. Well, that's a lot to glean about a person after 0.5 seconds and before they've even had a chance to say hello, and of course, it says a lot more to us about Dix than it does Sylvia. In a word, it affirms Dix's misogyny. Now, misogyny is a word I've used a lot in this video, and it's a word that shouldn't be confused with just plain old sexism towards women. Sexism towards women is a form of gender-based prejudice and/or discrimination. Misogyny is hatred of women. At least that's how I've come to interpret the difference. So, based on that interpretation, it's possible to be sexist towards women without hating them. What Dix feels towards women is prejudice, and he discriminates against them, and he also hates them. And this isn't just me guessing, he tells us as much. After a phone call with Sylvia, in which she asks him where he's been this morning because she's been trying to get in touch about inviting him to dinner with her and Brub, Dix ruminates angrily on her invitation. He wouldn't go out with them. He'd go out alone. He was a lone wolf. He didn't have to account to anyone, nor did he intend to. Sylvia Nicolai wanting to know where he was this morning. It was none of her damn business. Women were snoopy. He hated women. Brub would be snoopy too, He was a detective. So yeah, he's a self-confessed misogynist through and through. And even if Hughes hadn't been so explicit here, you can tell by the way he thinks about and treats all the women in his life. From his maid, a woman he describes as a shapeless sack with heavy feet, whose name he doesn't bother to learn and whose work he baselessly criticises, to a woman named Maud, friend to Sylvia and Brub, who he describes as a cute, babbling brunette, big-eyed, hips too wide for her salmon slacks, who, of course, obviously, had a thing for him instantly. She baby-eyed him while she headed for the couch, but he wasn't interested in her, the stupid little talking machine, a woman it would be a pleasure to throttle, a woman he would like to meet on a dark corner. It would, he declares, be a service to humanity. Fortunately, he never gets the chance. But back to Sylvia. Snoopy Sylvia, who reminds Dix of his burning hatred for women. She's demanding, she's nosy, and she's bossy. Typical woman. Or could it be something more than that? Dix permits himself to wonder. Sometimes Sylvia's eyes were disturbing, they were so wise. As if she could see under the covering of a man. Ridiculous, of course. You didn't ever have to give yourself away. Not if you were smart. This is the typical formula of Dix's delusory thinking. He feels his facade unravelling and then catches himself. No, don't be silly. You're Dix Steele. You're always one step ahead. Right from the off, however, Sylvia is on his case. She plays a magnificent game, calmly and subtly gathering evidence against him while protecting herself and her husband. And this is one of the big reasons that In a Lonely Place can be read as a feminist masterpiece, because it's Sylvia who, with wisdom, insight and sensitivity, catches the killer. And also shout out to Brub, her husband, who isn't dismissive of her. He's receptive to her theories, he listens to her, and his pride isn't hurt when she essentially solves the case before he does. But how does she accomplish this? How does it all end? I'm sure you're desperate to learn what happens to poor Laurel, to Sylvia, and I'm sure you want to know whether or not Dix gets his comeuppance. Reading this book is torturous because it keeps you guessing about these things until literally the final couple of pages, and in the lead up it could really go any which way. These final pages, this inimitable crescendo, leaves you on tenterhooks until the very last. He watched the mist begin to fall over the blue light of the patio. To fall and to hang there listlessly, silently. He waited there in his dark room, behind the dark window. Waited and watched. So, after a day of trying to work out whether the police are onto him, he ultimately decides that they're not. Dix is angrily pining away for Laurel, who has seemingly up and left. His anger didn't diminish, not even when the hopelessness of his vigil filled him as mist had filled the patio. Even then, the spire of his anger was hot and sharp. Yet so heavily did the hopelessness hang on him that the sound of a woman's footsteps wasn't communicated to his anger until she was within the patio. High, pointed heels, slacks, a careless coat over the shoulders, the colour washed out by the blue mist. A scarf to mask her flaming hair. He moved swiftly, moved before recognition was telegraphed to his anger. He was out the door, softly through the shadows. Dix Steele, ultimate hunter, spies his prey even when she's camouflaged, even when her red hair is hidden, her fire dulled by the blue light of the patio. Like a lion stalking his kill, Dix makes his move, silent, swift, and in total control. He came up behind her just as she reached the steps. "So you decided to come back," he said quietly. He had startled her. She swung around in quick terror. It wasn't Laurel. He looked into the face of Sylvia Nicolai. This is the moment in which Dix's delusion finally begins to give way. Look at how this passage harkens back to the very beginning of the novel, where we meet Dix and he's stalking that woman and he's really getting off on her increasing fear. He thinks he's recreating that moment, with him in control, his victim surprised and terrified. But, as Dix is about to learn, since he met the wise, intuitive and brave Sylvia Nicolai, he's never been in control. "What are you doing here?" he asked. And he saw that he was not mistaken. This was the very coat that Laurel had worn so often. It had the feel of her coat. Sylvia shrank away from his touch. She didn't answer him. Fear alone spoke from her wide blue eyes. "Where's Laurel?" he demanded again, still softly but more sharply. "Where's Laurel? What have you done with her?" Sylvia was caught there, backed against the step. She wanted to move away from him, but she couldn't. She was trapped. She found her voice. "Laurel's all right," she said gently. "Where is she?" He caught her shoulders. His hands tightened over them. He held her eyes. "Where is she?" Her voice failed, and then swiftly she moved. She twisted, catching him off guard, breaking through, leaving the coat in his hands. He turned. She hadn't run away. She hadn't sense enough to run away. She was standing there, only a slight distance from him, there by the blue pool. Her breath was coming in little gusts. She spoke clearly. "She isn't coming back, Dix. She's safe. She's going to stay safe." He unclenched his hands and the coat fell. It lay there on the ground, slumped there. He said, "You've poisoned her against me. You've always hated me. From the beginning, you hated me." He took one step towards her. She backed from him. "No, Dix. I've never hated you. I don't hate you even now." "From that first night, from the beginning," he was about to step towards her, but she was ready for him. He didn't move. He wouldn't warn her when he moved again. "From the beginning, I knew there was something wrong with you. From the first night you walked into our living room and looked at me, I knew there was something wrong. Something terribly wrong." He denied it. "You didn't know. You couldn't know." Neither had to fill in. Both knew they spoke of the same terror. He jeered, "You were jealous, because you wanted all of Brub. You didn't even want a friend to have a part of him." She didn't get angry. She shook her head, a little sadly. Absolute cinema. There is so much about this interaction that I adore. Sylvia undoes every one of Dix's stupid misogynistic assumptions, that she and Laurel would always be competitive, when in actual fact, Sylvia is protecting Laurel from him. That women are inherently spiteful and jealous, when in actual fact, she pities him. That she would never be able to work out who he was and what he had done, when in actual fact, she has had a hunch from the very beginning. That he always believed himself to be such a charmer of women, when in actual fact, the way he looked at her led her to uncover the dark intent with which he looks at all women. I love that Hughes celebrates Sylvia's intuition, her ability to sense when something or someone is bad, that she trusts her gut, but that she also acts with caution. She builds a case, she finds evidence before making her accusation. This is such an important point to dwell on, the idea of a woman feeling unsafe in the way a man looks at her. I don't think I know any women who haven't felt frightened by the way some man at some point has looked at her, objectified her, sexualized her. And when this happens, it's really hard to do anything about it. Firstly, because it can mean putting yourself in a dangerous situation. And secondly, because it's so easy to dismiss. The man could so easily deny it. He's not committed a crime, right? And the level of powerlessness and fear that can come with that can be debilitating. Now, of course, men and people of all gender identities and expressions can suffer from creepy, leering looks, and all people, including women, are capable of looking at others in that way. And I know it's #not all men, but it is Dix. And while not every creepy leerer does what Dix does to women, the phenomenon of a woman feeling unsafe by the way a man looks at her is very real. So when Sylvia feels this way, trusts it, takes steps to keep herself and Laurel safe, and ultimately trusts her gut to bring Dix down, it feels like a big win. It feels symbolic of an issue that has plagued women since the dawn of time and continues to plague them today. It's an empowering reminder that the men who do these things are not infallible. And while many of them get away with the most horrendous crimes, this doesn't have to be the case. They can be brought to justice. This goes hand in hand with another choice Hughes makes for her noir novel, one I think that is incredibly important. For all the horrendous, violent crime that takes place within this slim volume, we don't actually see any of it. It all happens off stage, so to speak. As Abbott writes, while we remain in his head for much of the book, it's what he does mostly in the gaps between chapters, the startling ellipses that form the dark marrow of the novel. Hughes doesn't sensationalise the deaths of these women. What Dix does isn't some form of showmanship, and we, as readers, are not permitted to leer over his crimes. Hughes doesn't give us the opportunity to gawp or rubberneck at this bloody crime scene. We don't get to exercise our morbid curiosity by becoming intimate with the body of a woman who was kidnapped, raped, and strangled. When we read about these women, take Mildred Atkinson for example, we learn more about the life she lived instead of the death she suffered. These deaths are shown for what they are. Completely vile and unglamorous acts committed by a frightened and deluded misogynist. This ethos reminds me very much of this wonderful book, The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which I strongly recommend everyone read. Simply put, it's the story of the 5 women believed to be murdered by Jack the Ripper, and unlike probably every other book on this case, it doesn't describe their deaths, the positions their bodies were found in, and very refreshingly, it doesn't spend words speculating over who Jack could have been. In essence, it refuses to glorify the killer. It doesn't metaphorically jerk off over the mutilated remains of his victims. It brings these women to life. And when their stories do come to an end, Rubenhold handles their untimely deaths with grace and sensitivity. Ellen Holland, among the last people to see Polly Nichols alive, remembered the clock on Whitechapel Church striking 2:30 when she parted with her friend. She watched Polly, in her jolly straw bonnet edged with black velvet, sway off in the direction of Whitechapel Road and disappear gradually into the darkness. At that hour, Polly would have known that her chances of begging money for her doss were slim. With her head spinning from drink and exhaustion, she wandered, stumbling through the network of East End streets. She steadied herself against walls and the sides of buildings, feeling her way through the night, groping for a place which might become a bed. Somewhere with a step or a slightly recessed doorway. The barest flickers of light from a window or distant lamp would have guided her down Buck's Row. She passed beyond a set of flat-fronted brick labourers' cottages, which offered no convenient nooks or porches until the curb dipped, and the wall became a gate, set back slightly from the footpath. She may have pushed on it to find that it refused to give way, or simply slid down with her back against it to rest. Her heavy head would have slumped, and her eyes eventually shut. This is not the sensationalistic and disrespectful way in which Polly Nichols and the other women murdered by an unknown misogynist are usually written about. Here, Rubenhold centres the victim and ensures she is not reduced, as she so often is, to a prop in a gruesome cautionary tale. In a different yet related way, this is what Hughes does with the women who are murdered in her novel. She doesn't allow us the chance to be voyeurs. She doesn't reduce these women to bloody props, and she doesn't glorify Dix or his horrendous crimes. But to return to the novel's epic crescendo, I love what we see of Sylvia in these final pages. I love the big reveal. I love that she disarms Dix so easily, to the point where, without having to try too hard, she gets him to more or less confess. It's absolute magic. And after such a tense read, wondering whether this fucker's gonna hurt her or Laurel and or get away with his crimes, the satisfaction is immense. But that wasn't enough. You had to take Laurel from me too, because you hated me so. She spoke now, without emotion. Laurel came to Brub, because she was afraid. Afraid of the way you looked at her, that night she asked you to take her to the drive-in. He gripped his hands. And you lied to her. Sylvia ignored him. It wasn't the first time she'd been afraid. But it was beginning to grow. Every time she spoke of Mel... Damn Mel! He cut in. Just a reminder, Mel Terrace is the man whose apartment Dix is subletting here in LA while he, Mel, is off travelling in Brazil. Or so Dix claims. What happened to Mel? Her voice lifted. Where is he? Without his car and his clothes? Without the cigarette lighter Laurel gave him, the cigarette lighter he wouldn't let out of his hands? He watched her in her little moment of triumph. What happened to Brucey? She went on, softly now. What happened to the girl who drank coffee in the drive-in with you? What happened to the girl in Westlake Park? To the girl who let you take her to the Paramount, to the girl on Spring Street, he broke in again. It didn't sound like his voice when he whispered, "I'm going to kill you." He leaped as he spoke. He didn't telegraph the movement, and he was on her, his hands on her throat before she knew. It was his hands that failed him, because they were shaking. Because before he could strengthen them enough, she was screaming and screaming. By the time he'd throttled the scream, the men were running to close in on him. One from the patio entrance, one from the shadows beyond the steps, one from the shadows behind him. He didn't release his grip. Not until he saw who it was running full towards him. Brub. And Brub's face was the face of a killer. It was Sylvia who saved Dix, because she whirled and went into Brub's arms, clung to him, keeping him from killing. She wasn't hysterical. What she cried was bell clear. "It worked!" she cried in her husky voice. "It worked!" All Dix's confidence, every snide smile, every witty remark, every time he played with fire and revelled in his own brilliance at never getting burned, it was all in his head. Taken down by Sylvia Nicolai, who trusted her gut, who gathered evidence, who helped the police build a case, who protected Laurel, and who bravely used herself as bait. Dix's resolve crumbles. His extreme toxic masculinity gives way to his fear and insecurity. He's arrested for a slew of murders, including Mel Terrace and Mildred Atkinson. He confesses to murdering his first girlfriend, Brucey, who was probably his first kill, and justice, we can hope, will now be served. I love how Sylvia is written. She's not stoic, she's emotional, she's scared and she's sad, but she's also specifically not hysterical, a word historically used to dismiss women's emotions and reactions. And this is why In a Lonely Place completely upturns convention. Because it's the women and their trust in each other and their own gut instincts that cracks the case, that brings to justice one of literature's most vile protagonists. Justice isn't served in a hyper-masculine kind of way. Sylvia is at the helm, assisted by Laurel and by Brub. After trying his damnedest to Madonna whore Sylvia and Laurel, Dix fails, because these women are real, well-written, multifaceted humans, rather than one-dimensional female stereotypes. So, can we read the femme fatale as feminist? I think Hughes proves that we absolutely can. Dix tries again and again to make Laurel into nothing more than a sex object, an appendage, but her words and her actions routinely deny and defy his objectification. She looks after herself. She's sensible. She often refuses his offer of drinks when she feels unsafe, and she doesn't ignore her suspicions. She seeks help. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the femme fatale often leads the protagonist into danger. And in this book, this is technically true. It's largely thanks to Laurel's suspicions that Dix eventually gets arrested. But this is another brilliant way Hughes subverts the stereotype, because Laurel isn't the villain here. Dix is the villain. He is the danger. He is responsible for the danger that he now faces himself, having been caught, and he will suffer the consequences of his actions. Laurel is, I think, a great example of how the femme fatale can embody feminist traits. And more than that, this entire novel is a blinding example of noir fiction in which women aren't reduced to Madonna whore stereotypes, aren't used as bloody props, in which they upturn gendered expectations and work hard to correct the wrongs done against them by a horrid misogynist. And this reframing can have a huge impact on the way we, as readers, approach the character of the femme fatale. As Abbott so eloquently puts it, after reading In a Lonely Place, you find yourself looking, with a newly gimlet eye, at every purported femme fatale, every claim of female malignancy, and the burning need of noir heroes to snuff that malignancy out. Dorothy B. Hughes, at a time when it was common to reduce women to hysterical victims or deviant seductresses, innocent angels or bloody victims, gives us a narrative in which women are treated with humanity and nuance, their lives respected, and their powers recognised. But what do you think? Can the femme fatale be feminist? What other groundbreaking noir and crime fiction should I read next? Please let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the intersection of criminality and feminism, watch our video on murder, menstruation, and the trial of Lizzie Borden by clicking here next.